Greetings and salutations, viewers. I'm StarPrincessHLC, coming at you with another review. This time of a video game, particularly a video game I've already completed on the channel, which I'll have a link in the description below. Particularly an HD remake of a video game I played on the channel already. Of course, I'm talking about Odin Sphere. This baby had an HD remake about last year. Actually, it's been about 10 years since this game originally came out on the PS2, and wow, it's quite amazing considering, the game looks absolutely beautiful. And I'm not just talking about the HD remake, like the original PS2 game. It's beautifully done. Obviously, I could go on and on about the graphics and such, but we're not here to talk about that. Although, considering I'm talking about an HD remake, I don't know. But I'll be talking about some of the differences between the two games. I wanted to do this for a while after I finished Odin Sphere and decided to get the HD remake for my birthday. I wanted to give this a proper send-off and kind of talk about the differences between the two, obviously, because normally I'm not the kind of person that likes HD remakes. Half the time it just feels like they're just upping the graphics so you can put on next-gen consoles and then you have to pay for the game twice. Normally I don't really care for that kind of business transaction, especially considering half the time it just seems like they just up the graphics a little bit and then they don't do anything with it. There are some exceptions, like with the Kingdom Hearts HD remakes, where they put multiple games in the section and, show off some of the stuff that maybe some of us English speakers didn't get to see the first time, like the Final Mix version of games. So certain ones are exceptions, but for the most part, I find it a ridiculous kind of notion. But with this particular HD remake, I would say this one is definitely one you should buy. Especially if you are a big fan of the original Odin Sphere. Because let me at least break down, some of the things. Obviously, the graphics have been updated tremendously. That's a no-given. It's still a very beautiful game, just like pretty much any of Vanillaware's games, like, Moramas, the Demon Blade is a really pretty game. Dragon's Crown, although some people had issue with some of the art style of that game, it's still a very pretty game. There was another game that they have done in the past. I forget what it's called. It had a witch in it, but that one is also really well animated and drawn. And they also did some game for the Sega Saturn, I believe, that supposedly Odin Sphere was originally going to be a sequel to, but ended up getting changed over time. But they do really pretty games, so graphics-wise, it's always a good thing with the Vanillaware games, even if, sometimes you could question some of the design choices. I know a lot of people did not like the Sorceress and Amazon designs of Dragon's Crown, and I can see some people getting a little questionable about, the design of Odette in Odin Sphere, because, she's got the big boobs, and she's got what I call the spider vagina, but I don't know what else you can say about that. I mean, it's like she lifts up her dress and there's a giant spider under there. What am I supposed to say on that? But for the most part, Odin Sphere is, a very tame game, and it is very pretty. Although, watching it, I admit, on a big screen, you can definitely see some of the problems with some of the animation. Like, for example, when you're in Odin's throne room, sometimes it doesn't look like the characters are properly walking on the stairs. I did notice that from time to time, but it's definitely way more obvious on a big screen. Or at the very end of Armageddon, when Gwendolyn and Oswald faint, and you can see that Oswald's legs are kind of sticking straight up in the air when he should be more, on the ground. But it's very disjointing at times. But for the most part, the game is really pretty, and it puts a lot of amazing, minute little details you wouldn't expect in each of the characters, showing off different personalities of them, even in just the slightest little movements. Like, for example, when you're eating something, when you're giving your character something to eat, they all have their own unique little tics about when they eat. Like, for example, Gwendolyn always seems to stifle her mouth as if she's, stopping a burp from coming. Or with Oswald, he just wipes his face really quickly, like, just making sure nothing's on there. And Mercedes, she like licks her fingers to get all the taste off of them. So just those tiny little things you can see in the animation. The fact they put so much detail into that, kind of giving everybody their own unique personality, even those small little idle moments that you wouldn't think would be that big of a deal. Even when they're eating at the Puka restaurant and such, they all eat differently. Like, Oswald will shove the food into his gullet as fast as possible, and like Mercedes would cut it up very finely and eat very delicately and slow. It's interesting kind of seeing like their different character traits while in just a simple little moment, and the fact they put that much detail in the animation is always really cool to see. The fact that they did that, I really like that, and it becomes way more obvious seeing some of the actions of these characters on the big screen compared to when I was doing it on the emulator. Like, you could actually see the characters trembling more when they're scared, or certain facial expressions, like when Oswald smiles upon seeing Gwendolyn. There's a lot of nuance to it, even in these simple little moments, and I really like that.
No one controls me now. From now on, I act on my own. For you.
But in terms of the gameplay, they did a major overhaul on the battle mechanics for the HD remake. Like, I could see why it would take them so long to do. Because for those of you who aren't familiar with the actual battle mechanics of the game, which I would say, if you haven't played the original or watched my playthrough of it, it's kind of obvious that the battle mechanics were probably one of the weakest elements of the original title. Like, you had this bar. Like, basic of the premise of the battle mechanics in the original game was you had a power bar. And depending on how often you click the square button, your attack button, that power meter would go down. And if you ran out on that power meter, your character would get exhausted. You can't move anywhere. You can heal, obviously, but for the most part, you were basically stuck panting and waiting and just praying that that bar went up faster, because otherwise you were open to attacks. And the way that the game kind of played it with it is that, unfortunately, your character had a very bad knockback. And on top of that, you could get hit multiple times, even after getting hit once. Like, it could be that you got hit by a Valkyrie in 1 minute, and then the next you're being pummeled with ice or pummeled with magic in the same sentence, and then you're completely knocked out without even having a chance to defend yourself, whereas the enemies barely had any knockback. And with that power meter, it was a bit of a problem. You basically had to hope that you had killed enough enemies to absorb some phosons to power that up, or you had to wait it out, particularly by going invisible, to try and keep yourself from getting KO'd. And it was rather frustrating. I was on the easiest mode of the game, and I was constantly dying because I kept running out of power and getting myself knocked back a lot. It was rather frustrating. I loved the game, but that part really did frustrate me. With the new game, with the HD remake, you don't have that problem. You can attack as much as you want. It's like they took a bit of the inspiration from Dragon's Crown, the game mechanics for that, and implemented that into this game, and it works way better. Like, the fact that you can keep attacking and not have to worry about getting exhausted and beat up is so much better. It's so much more fun to play, and it's so much more fluid, especially when you can chain combos together and just annihilate your enemies. They still have a bit of a struggle where they don't seem to have as much of a knockback as you do, but the fact that you can still keep attacking and don't have to worry about losing energy so quickly is such a bonus. It's especially better for Oswald, who ran out of power incredibly fast whenever he used his Shadow Knight ability. And basically half the time I had to go invisible just to keep him from getting swarmed and killed, because he would constantly run out every time you use the Shadow Knight ability. Now the Shadow Knight ability is in a separate little thing where he has a little berserk bar, where if you kill enough enemies, and you can actually like speed up the process by using a certain ability to capture enemies and steal some of their phosons, but this berserk ability lets you basically kind of handle it like, I would say, maybe the rage mode in like God of War, where you click a button and suddenly you go Shadow Knight and you do all your attacks, and then eventually your bar runs out and you go back to your normal ability, or you can turn it off at any time by pressing the buttons. But it makes it so much easier to do that. It makes Oswald a lot more fun to play as. Like, I like Oswald to begin with. I like his character, but his gameplay for me was a very frustrating bit at times, just because it's like, I don't want to use the Shadow Knight ability because it's detrimental. And yet sometimes that Shadow Knight ability would be the best option to take enemies out. The only one I might argue in terms of the frustration of the gameplay in this new version is probably Mercedes, because again, her ability is always so much more different from the other characters. Everyone else is very melee based, with Gwendolyn and her spear, Cornelius and Oswald with their swords, and then Velvet's got her chain. Mercedes is kind of the odd one out just because she's got the crossbow. She does the shooty shoots, and while it is kind of fun to do when you're bouncing around, flying around, shooting people, the problem is that she runs out really quick and has to reload, and the only time you can reload is when you're on the ground, and that's when Mercedes is the most vulnerable. So hers is kind of a bit of a balancing act, especially since they seem to keep the whole power bar thing to her. Like, I should explain that now they still have the power bar, but it isn't used for your actual like physical attacks, like for the exception of Mercedes, because she's got her crossbow. But she doesn't like pass out or get tired or anything. You just have to go back and reload really quick. But other than that, it's not terrible, but it's still awkward at the same time. I know I'm not explaining it the best, but I should also explain, but I am trying to explain the power bar situation. With the power bar, now it's actually used for your abilities. Yes, they actually changed the character's ability traits to now into more of a skill tree set kind of thing. Like, originally, everybody almost exclusively had the exact same abilities in the original game, with maybe the exception of Mercedes having like one different ability. But for the most part, everybody had the same abilities. They all had Cyclone and Phozon Burst and Invisible and Phozon Heal, and they all had the same thing. It was very, unified. It was like no variety in that, despite the fact that every character was different. With this game, they actually made it that everybody has their own set unique abilities and skills that they could use in battle. There's, similar ways to how they work, but for the most part, they're all different. What you have to do with this particular one is, which is also a good way with how they fixed the situation with the map, because the map was a little bit difficult to navigate too, but, I'll get to that in a sec. But in this game, in the HD remake, now they have it where you have to find these little Phozon shards scattered throughout an area of the map. Be it like fighting a certain group of enemies, by completing a certain task, by exploring your territory and finding secret passages to these different areas. But once you find these certain Phozon shards, then you can unlock certain abilities for your character, and you use your Phozons that you collect from enemies to level them up so they become more powerful, which is a really neat and unique way to do it. It's definitely a lot better than what it was in the original one, where basically the phosons were used to power up your power meter so you could attack quicker, but also to just basically spam some random attacks when you need them. In this one, they serve a purpose, and there's two different sets of items that you have to use for those. Obviously, you have the power meter for certain abilities, like if you're let me think of a certain bump. For the most part, most of the characters have like abilities that you can use for melee combat, and then there's others that are like spells, and there's two separate kind of bars that deal with that along with your health bar. So it's an interesting balancing act of trying to keep those both filled in order to attack. Again, it really depends on which which skills you end up using. And even there's also another part of the skill tree where you can, using ability points that you get from eating food and leveling up, you could actually upgrade some of your characters' like passive stats. Like, for example, you can make it that you don't get status effects as easily. You can lower the amount of money that you spend at the shops. You can get more experience and health from eating food. You can do more damage to down foes. That kind of stuff. It varies, and as time goes on, it really helps over time that you can have these type of passive abilities that allow you more customization for these characters, which is good considering they're all different in their own play styles. Obviously, it's similar in certain situations, with the exception of Mercedes, they're all melee based, but they all play in different ways. Like, Gwendolyn and Velvet are more prone to aerial attacks. Oswald and Cornelius are more suited for ground attacks. That kind of situation.
Why are you giving me something so precious?
How can I say it? Well, it's because I want to see you smile, to see you happy.
Also, a thing that they changed with this game is the boss fights. And let me tell you, a lot of these boss fights, oh my god, they are so much better in the HD remake. I mean, you remember when I was complaining about the fight between Beldor, I think it was one of the wizards, and the dragon? That fight was so frustrating in the original game, where basically the only way you could actually do damage to the wizard was by knocking his flying swords at him and disorienting him for an extended period of time before he poofed and you had to do it all over again. With this game, they made it so much easier. You can still disorient him with the swords, but you can actually do damage to him while, he's just running around. You have to wait a certain time, obviously, to attack him, like when he's casting spells or stuff, otherwise he'll just poof away. But it is so much easier and less frustrating than the original game. Like, I was playing it on normal difficulty through this, and I probably beat it really quickly. At least in terms of, it took me forever with the original game, and that was on easy mode. On this one, with normal difficulty, it really was a lot more fun, and it wasn't as hard. I think maybe when I first play through, at least, like, say, Gwendolyn, I think I might have died, like, maybe a total of 5 times throughout the whole of Gwendolyn's story, and that was mainly because I wasn't keeping enough track on my health and was just too wrapped up in the fight to notice. But pretty much this is definitely a lot easier to manage, and it's way more fun to play, and especially the boss fights. They also have this interesting thing with the boss fights where they actually have 2 separate bars. Like, they have way more health than in the original game. Like, a ridiculously large amount of health. And you actually can tell how far along you are in terms of their health because they have a little meter, a little purple meter right above their normal health bar, and kind of shows, as time goes on, how much health they have left. Like, they tend to have various stages, like, say like in the Kingdom Hearts games, where the enemies had multiple health bars, and depending on what color health bar was, you could see how far it was until they died. That's basically what it is here, where you take down one set of health bar, and then a little bit of the boss bar breaks off, and it shows like, okay, I have this much left before I can actually down them. And the nice thing about this is also, the more you break down their bar, they actually can drop items for you. Like, you can have certain, like, they'll even drop a health potion at times. They'll drop, like, toxin potions, or a volcano, or cyclone, or something. I should mention that the cyclone abilities and the napalm and such have been revamped. The alchemy engine that they did for this has changed a lot, where you still have, you could do alchemy where you can make your own potions and such, but they actually did it that you have multiple options on how to do it. It isn't just, for health potions, just one character and a material ball. You have different options depending on what items you have in your inventory to make a health potion, and it's a lot easier. It's also a lot easier to make stronger materials. Like, every single potion has a different level that is there. Like, you could have just a level 1 health potion, but compared to a level 9 health potion, which is much more, potent, there's a big difference in terms of that, where it'll give you more health depending on how strong the potion is. So that's a nice little touch on the situation as well, that you can basically level up your potions and have something stronger or weaker than another. But the cyclone ability is still in the game, it's just now a potion instead. The napalm has now been changed to volcano, and they have toxin still, but I think it does a bigger range now, where it actually goes in both directions as opposed to just one. And what was the other one? Oh, there's also one called a whirlwind, which is like a big giant cyclone that you can suck a bunch of enemies in, and they go spinning around in the air and does a ton of combo damage. It's awesome. But they really did up a lot of that kind of stuff. And yeah, you can actually get those from boss enemies, and some of them can even use like health potions and such, so you actually have to attack them rather quickly in order to keep them from like bringing up their health or getting overpowered or something. So it does add a lot more in terms of that. Also, the enemies, particularly the bosses, will call for help and send more enemies to get you. I think that was in the original, but this time you actually see them purposely calling them as opposed to them just showing up and be like, where'd you guys come from? But they really made the boss fights way more fun to do and way more fun. Like, especially the enemies of Armageddon. Like, particularly like the fights with Galen and the Cauldron. Those ones were rather tedious in the original game, where Galen had 6 heads you had to deal with, and then you had to attack his heart. In this game, they actually lowered it down to him having only 3 heads, and you have to hit the heart, but it's a lot easier to do. Not to mention, they added some difficulty by adding more enemies into the situation, on top of having like tentacles pop out and attack you in the middle of trying to smash the heart and such. They still have the similar, abilities they had in the original game, but upped. Like the Cauldron, like I remember the Cauldron was incredibly tedious in the original one, because half the time you were struggling to climb the damn thing so you could attack the eye, and then you get knocked down and you gotta do it all over again. And not to mention, you had to constantly be trying to farm phosons in order to attack them with the phoson burst to get rid of all the things around them. In this one, it's a lot easier to climb up the cauldron and attack the eye. But they also have the gimmick where after you attack the eye, you gotta jump back down off the cauldron and attack the core that gets exposed at the bottom. And it's a weird balancing act of trying to do that, but it's way more fun to do than the original cauldron fight. So the fact that they improved on these boss fights that originally were very frustrating at times is such a big plus.
A strike like lightning. There has never been anyone as brave as you in all of history.
Also, they fixed the map. The map was, I can admit, a little bit frustrating in the original one because half the time you're wandering blind and just hoping that you find the map so you know where you're going. And at one point it even got to the point where I didn't get the map to like the room right before the boss fight, and it's like, come on, how am I supposed to navigate properly with this whole situation? With the map, they branched it out in different places like usual. It's still the roundabout thing with the little map in the corner that shows you where all the enemies are, even when they're not on screen. But they definitely changed the map around where you can explore more places. There's more rest stops as well. Like, interesting about these rest stops, it isn't just, going to a shop and buying stuff. You could, it depends on where you are in the storyline, but you could even have the option of going to the Puka village really early on. And particularly, there's a new mechanic in it with this character, Mori. He's this big, chubby, happy-go-lucky puka that loves to cook. And if there's a bell in the majority of the areas, again, depending on which chapter you're in, and if you ring the bell, he comes with his little, traveling kitchen, and he makes food for you. And obviously the food helps your health, but it also gives you experience and allows you to level up. And leveling up is how you get ability points for your skill tree, so it all kind of melds together. But they added this neat little thing where now the restaurants and bakery and such in the Puka village, you don't have to collect recipes for that. You collect the recipes for Mori. So when you're out in the field, he can make you food to up your strength. And actually, if you eat like 3 times a certain type of food from his restaurant, he actually comes up with a new recipe with, more ingredients to add, obviously, but more experience and more chances of leveling up in the long run. And there actually is an achievement for eating everything at Mori's restaurant. I still need to get it, obviously. It's probably the hardest one you can get in the game. That's probably the hardest achievement you're ever going to get in the game. Like, the achievements in this game are super easy to get. Like, if you're an achievement hog, this one probably won't take you very long, with maybe the exception of Mori's restaurant one, because basically all the achievements are pretty much just completing the game, like, doing everybody's storylines, getting everybody's abilities, completing Armageddon in the right order, unlocking the certain cutscenes, like the one at the end of the game and the one with Velvet and Cornelius, which I showed at the end of mine. Some strange little ones as well, like getting yourself beat up by the Mandragoras 5 times. Yeah, those strange little plant dudes that are in the ground that you attack to make items, yeah, they're still around. And actually, apparently Mercedes has an ability where she can actually command an army of those little Mandragoras to attack enemies. I haven't tried it out for myself, but from what I've heard, it's rather hilarious to see, like, Odin and all these other characters getting their asses handed to them by a bunch of carrots. So I'll have to probably try that out on my own. But the fact is, they added quite a bit on that, especially with Mori. Mori is definitely, like, a good addition to the whole series. He really fits in well with the characters. He seems like a genuinely sweet and fun guy, and compared to a lot of the designs of the Pukas, he's definitely unique. Because let's face it, there's a bit of recoloring going on with a lot of the Pukas. Like, it always just seems to kind of follow the same kind of pattern. You get the male Pukas, you got the female Pukas, you got the old Pukas, and then there's not a lot of room in between that. There's some variations slightly with like Cornelius and Velvet, but other than that, everybody's pretty much the same thing. But Mori is a nice little addition, and it's a great way to like level your character up really easily if you collect enough of the ingredients. But it is definitely the hardest achievement to get in the game, I will admit.
My name is Mori. I'm known as the Traveling Hookah Chef.
Which, by the way, I should mention, like, the wrong endings in that game when you don't do the right order in Armageddon. Oh my god, they are dark. Like, you think Corpse Party has some crazy wrong ends. Like, oh my god, I felt just absolutely awful at the end of, like, my first wrong end playthrough. When, like, I had Cornelius fight off against Galen, and it was basically like, oh, you're gonna be in my stomach for all eternity, and you will feed the maggots inside me, and it's like, okay, didn't expect that from a pretty lighthearted game that we've seen thus far. Well, then again, it's not overtly lighthearted, is it? The game has some very dark undertones, despite its, pretty nature, but some of the endings you get on that are incredibly dark. Like, I'll admit, the one with Mercedes and Ingwe saying goodbye was probably one of the sweeter ones that I saw. Most of the other ones were just like, wow. Especially at the very end of, like, your first run-through of it, when you see Miris, Gwendolyn's Puka companion, sitting on top of, like, this pillar, this last bastion of land left in this broken-down world, and she's, like, crying to the heavens, like, this is a horrible ending. If my death could have saved somebody I love, this would be worth it. And it's like, I have to get all these endings in order to unlock the final, like, ending with Cornelius and Velvet. And it's just like, are you kidding me? You're making me feel bad, and I have to do this in order to complete the game properly. Just why? But oh my god, they get so dark sometimes. A bunch of them kind of get a little samey, where it's like you watch them die and, see their ciphers being left behind or something. Like, pretty much the ones for, like, the Cauldron and Levanthan are all pretty much the exact same, like, thing. There's not a lot of variety with that. But for some of the ones that are unique, like Oswald versus Onyx, or Gwendolyn versus Onyx, or, like, Velvet versus Darkova, they get really dark and depressing, and it's like, wow, thanks, game. It's like, you're punishing me for trying to complete the game. Thanks. But either way, it's still rather pretty, even when you're watching the world burn around you. It's absolutely fantastic. Whew. Although I still think probably my favorite wrong end is still the one with Ingwe and Mercedes, just because it's the one time they have a sweet little moment amongst each other, other than, like, the quick little clip you see at the very end of the credits and such with the World Tree. But damn, Vanillaware, you could be dark.
The tip of Horn Mountain is sinking. This is the last piece of land in Arion. Whose wish was this? Please, as long as someone survives this cataclysm, I would gladly give my body and soul up to the heavens. If my wish comes true, and someone I love survives, then my death would have some meaning. This is a terrible ending.
But even after you complete the game, which I have to recheck to see if it's actually with the original one. I don't think it is, but don't quote me on that. But in this one, after you beat the game the first time, like you properly beat, Armageddon with the right order and such, then if you go back to the to your save file and you go back to character stories on the map, in the main map area when you're choosing a level to go to, they actually have a little dot in the middle of the entire thing of the lake called the Churning of the Rift of the World or something like that. And that's actually an achievement you have to do, where you have to complete that area. It is actually, in fact, a boss rush where you fight every single boss in the game all at one go without the use of any shops or anything, except for like a couple rest stops here and there along the way. But you can't use your item box. I should also mention that you actually get a storage system in this game, and that is actually a way better opportunity than in the first one, where you had to be very careful about what you had on you. But yeah, now you get like a little storage box right next to any kind of shop, and you can put items in it. And you can store quite a bit up there. I think like 128 items can go in one box, and each character has their own separate box. And after you complete the game the first time, you actually can switch between character boxes. But that makes things so much easier, especially when you're like trying to complete Mori's achievement of getting all the food in his or eating all the food in his restaurant, because the items in your storage box can still be used for the recipes. Even if it's not in your like immediate inventory, you can actually still complete certain recipes if you have the item in your storage box, which makes things so much easier for storage. Also, I should mention that you don't have to buy bags from the merchant in order to have more storage space. You actually can collect storage items as you go along. So in certain areas, if you fight a certain enemy, by the end of it, after you complete it, you can get a bag that makes it so you can store further up. You can store up to 64 items per character, and then the 128, I guess, for the box, but that makes things a lot easier. But yeah, in the Turning of the Rift of the World, it's a pretty much straight up boss rush without, any rest stops, with the exception of like one or two, and even then, half the time I never even used them, and no storage chests. And there's a lot of mini bosses to go through, like a lot. I should also mention that they actually created new mini bosses for the different areas. They're all unique in a certain way. I mean, it gets a little samey after a while when you're fighting them for like the umpteenth time as a different character, but they're all unique looking and they all fit the areas really well. Like for the snowy area, they got like this huge troll monster that actually comes out like he's a big old mountain, and he's got this huge glowing pink horn that you have to attack, and he actually sprouts like little trolls off of his back that attack you. It's quite an impressive fight. Or like in the Netherworld, they got this thing called a creep, which honestly looks kind of like a giant seaweed monster with tentacles coming out everywhere, and he spawns all these different skeletons, and at one point he actually can spawn like gaster blasters. They basically are like giant monster skulls, and it's like, oh come on, that's totally a gaster blaster almost. But he's really weird looking, and he vanishes and reappears and spawns tentacles everywhere, and he's really freaky looking. And then in the volcano area, they have a phoenix rider. They have like this little itty bitty fire girl riding on top of this, almost looks kind of like a cardinal, but apparently it's a phoenix. And she can spawn fire and everything around you, and that's a really weird one as well. And then like for the Ragnarval characters, for like Odin's troops, they got an airship that's piloted by dwarves that shoots fireballs and electricity, and you have to beat up the balloons in order to get it. And then like in, in Ringford, yeah, with the Land of the Fairies, they have like this strange mushroom-like creature that like transforms into 3 different types of mushrooms and can poison you and beat you up. It's really freaky. Oh, I should also mention, like, in what was it, in Mercedes level, they have a couple of moments where you actually basically have a shooting arrangement, like a shooting arena, where you're permanently flying and shooting at enemies as they go by. That was so much fun. I almost kind of wish they had more than like 2 moments of that in the game. I guess it would get kind of samey after a while, but it was strangely fun. But no, these mini-bosses are really cool and unique to the different worlds that they go to. And they don't add a huge much in terms of storyline or anything, but they're cool to fight, and you always feel like really badass after you fight them, especially that huge, abominable snowman-like guy in the winter area. But definitely a lot of improvement on like the bosses and the maps and such. But having to fight all these guys like, one by one without any use of items. Well, you go in with the items that you had on you and hope it turns out. But at the end of it, if you actually do beat the journey of the Rift of the World, you get a special item at the end called a Royal Orb. And it actually is like the best item you can get in the game. And they do stack up, apparently. So basically you can get every character to have a Royal Orb, and you could probably like put that on your characters, because I should also mention that they actually upped the equipment where you can have more than one item on you now. You can actually have up to 3 items on you now in terms of equipment, and they all still have their own various things on them, like the Ancient Crystal, who can save you from death once, etc., etc. But that's a nice touch too, considering, just having one item on you the whole time is not always easy. So they definitely took more of the RPG elements into it while still having it as kind of a beat 'em up. But definitely a lot of improvements on this particular style of gameplay by a long shot. And they even have it at the end where you can unlock the hardest difficulty in the game. And I've yet to actually try it myself. I will probably be doing that off time when I have the chance. But they do have the option where you could do an extra new game mode as well, where after you beat the game, you choose extra game mode and you could choose your save file, and you can go back and play the game like it was new, but with all the stats you had from the previous run of that save file. So that's a nice little touch to it. It probably makes things a whole lot easier as well.
Gwendolyn, we're witnessing a miracle. We cannot give up. We must have hope.
The storyline is really good. The characters are really interesting. And with this HD remake, and they've upped the battle mechanics, because I could definitely see like people getting easily frustrated with the original game, with the struggling power bar and the knockbacks and such. I could see people getting very frustrated, and believe me, I got frustrated plenty of times too. I managed to muscle through it, but it took a while. But with this HD remake, it's vastly improved on the original and just made me fall in love with Odin Sphere all over again. And I'd only just played it I finished it like a few days before this came in the mail. So, that if that ain't a testament to how awesome this is, I don't know what is. I mean, obviously this isn't going to be for everybody. If you're not into beat 'em ups or that kind of thing, or RPGs, this probably isn't going to be your big cup of tea, obviously, but if you're a big fan of the original, this is definitely a massive improvement. And if you're, a newbie and you want to check out Odin Sphere for yourself, I highly recommend doing the HD remake first. You actually do have the option to play the original classic mode of Odin Sphere on the HD remake as well, but I almost want to say, unless you are somewhat masochistic and want to challenge yourself with the original controls, that would probably be the only reason I'd say use it at this point. I would say, definitely play the HD remake if you're, want to experience Odin Sphere in its best glory. Like, again, the most I could probably complain about is some of the choices they made with, like, Mercedes' design with her battle mechanics, where she still kind of uses the power meter for her normal attacks. I found that a little bit kind of silly. But other than that, I would say this is definitely a buy. Like, this is someone who doesn't like HD remakes normally. This one, I would definitely say buy and play for yourself. Especially if you love the original Odin Sphere, or if you really just want to see it for yourself. And not sure what else to say on this, but happy 10 years, Odin Sphere. You've probably changed the world for the better. And actually, I believe this HD remake really helped Vanillaware do well financially. So, here's hoping they do more in the future, because, I love this game. I love Dragon's Crown. I have yet to check out, like, some of the other ones, like Muramasa, and the ones that I briefly touched upon, I think, in this one. But Princess Crown, I think one of them was named, the one for the Sega Saturn. I forget what the other one was. Grimoire, I think it was called. They definitely like their fantasy. Like, I will say that. But they do really nice games. And, I'd love to see more of what they're doing. I don't know if they have anything else in the works. Maybe they'll say something at E3. I honestly don't know. Hard to say. But thank you, Vanillaware, for, putting so much effort in an HD remake of one of your classic games. And thank you, Atlus, for, like, translating it for us. Because otherwise this probably would have stayed in Japan, and we wouldn't get to see, like, how awesome this game really is. Could you do that with a few other Japanese games? Like, seriously, there's some good ones out there that never made it to the States, and I'd really like to see them. There's certain games that I would like to see translated and put into English, but I haven't done. Cough, Mother 3, cough. But, yeah, like, if you've sat through my ramblings throughout this whole thing, I'm just gonna say, like, if you're a fan of the original Odin Sphere, get the HD remake if you haven't already. If you're new and you haven't played this before, get the HD remake, because you probably will fall in love with this game fairly quickly, even if the voice acting is not always the greatest, I will admit. Sometimes the English dub can be a little slow on the upkeep, but not terrible. I mean, it's not like, it's not like 4Kids related or anything, but it can be a little bit weird at times. Also, if you really love the music is really good. I mean, I'm not sure what else to say, but, this is an awesome game. Not sure what else to say about it. It's definitely an awesome game. There's not much I could say in terms of criticism in terms of the HD remake. Like, all the problems I had with the original Odin Sphere, they fixed in the HD remake. With, obviously, the exception of maybe Mercedes, but to be fair, Mercedes was never one of my favorite characters to play as. And yet, she gets a comic book about her. Can you believe that they actually have a comic book about this game? It hasn't made it to the States yet, sadly, but I've seen, like, I've seen screenshots of it, and it looks really nice. But I have a feeling it probably is just, treading old territory at this point. It's like, if you want to know the storyline, play the game yourself. But once again, thank you, Vanillaware. Thank you, Atlus. Thank you, everybody who has been sitting here watching me ramble about a game. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully, we'll get more from Vanillaware in the future. Maybe we'll hear more about, it'd be kind of interesting if they did a sequel to it, like kind of explaining the end of it and seeing where it goes. But who knows? I guess only time will tell. Otherwise, it might just stay as a standalone game, and I'm perfectly okay with that too. So, who knows? But for now, this is StarPrincessHLC saying thank you very much for watching, and have a fond farewell. Let me know in the comments below what you would like to see me review next. Bye bye!